And before you ask, the man who just had his duvet pulled off him is one of the 2 asylum seekers who were convicted in October 2025 of murder. And they're joined by a host of other savage killers, all of whom having either been jailed or convicted in October 2025. Let's head straight to our first story, whose antagonist, who you've already met, reckons he's 19. Late at night on the 20th of October 2024, mother of one, Rhiannon White, aged 27, had just reached Bescot Stadium Station in Walsall near Birmingham, West Midlands, having finished her shift at the nearby Park-Inn Hotel, when a man jumped out on her and started viciously stabbing her with a screwdriver. The man stabbed Miss White no fewer than 23 times, 11 of which penetrated her skull, with one stab wound cutting through her brainstem. Minutes after the attack, Miss White was found slumped in a platform shelter by a member of railway staff. Miss White initially survived but never regained consciousness, and she died in hospital 3 days later. This act of murder from small boat asylum seeker Deng Chol Majek, a Sudanese national who was being accommodated at the hotel where Miss White worked, not only triggered national outrage and disgust when, in October 2025, the perpetrator was convicted, but also left us all confused. Majek, who denied his guilt from start to finish, but who was caught on camera stalking Miss White shortly before her murder and whose DNA was found at the scene, has never said why he did what he did. Before we learn more of the horrific details to this murder, including the dancing that the perpetrator did on returning to the hotel after killing Miss White, if I've got you hooked on the video, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready, and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'd appreciate you. Majek arrived in the UK on a small boat on the 29th of July 2024. He was living at the Park-Inn Hotel, which was owned by Radisson, but was then being managed by Serco as an asylum hotel. On the said date, Miss White, who had worked at the hotel for 3 months, was on a late shift from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. The court heard that earlier in the day, her co-workers noticed Majek staring at her and at other colleagues in a manner described by those colleagues as intimidating, scary and spooky. At the end of her shift, Miss White went outside for a vape before walking across the road to the station to catch a train home. Majek was seen on CCTV following her from a distance to the station and then following her over the bridge to platform 2. Miss White had called her friend Emma Cowley, who she had known since they were 5, while she was on her way to the station. During video evidence given to the court, Miss Cowley said she heard 2 terrified high-pitched screams and then a long breath before the phone went dead. The murder weapon, again a screwdriver, has never been found. Less than 90 minutes later, more footage showed Majek dancing at the hotel while emergency services were still working at the nearby scene trying to save Miss White's life. No remorse and no guilt from Majek, but instead jubilation and satisfaction. The man wasn't dancing though when the police came for him.
Just leave him there for now. That's all this. Sorry?
Don't touch anything.
Don't touch nothing.
So, who's this going to?
Please.
What's your name? Deng Chol. What's it? Deng Chol.
Just a second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Try that.
Prosecutors told the jury that Majek's actions after the murder had been utterly callous. Despite the figure in the CCTV footage being of a similar build and wearing identical clothing as Majek, the killer repeatedly argued in court that it wasn't him. He also said that other evidence, which included Miss White's DNA under his nails and her blood on his clothing, was wrong. The man showed no emotion when, on the 24th of October 2025, Following a 2-week trial at Wolverhampton Crown Court, the jury returned its verdict after a little over 2 hours of deliberations. In a statement outside the court, Miss White's sister, Alexandra, who is now raising Miss White's son, who was only 5 years old when he lost his mother, said that Majek had stolen a crucial piece of her family. Because of discrepancies over how old Majek is, the judge, Mr. Justice Sewell, has ordered an age assessment report to be drawn up before the man is sentenced. You see, in court, Majek claimed that he was 19, as I mentioned earlier, but prosecutors said they think he's in his mid-20s. He looks even older than that to me. Anyway, establishing accurately how old he is will have a bearing on how he is sentenced. The man is due to be sentenced at Wolverhampton Crown Court on the 15th of December 2025. In case you're not already feeling sufficiently sickened at the fact that someone who came to this country illegally seeking safety and was accommodated at the taxpayer's expense chose to end an innocent woman's life, sorry, but Haybe Cabdiraxmaan Nur, another illegal immigrant, murdered his victim in a busy high street bank, and his story, which we're now about to hear, hit the headlines around the same time as Majek's.
He's here.
Show us your hands! Police officer taser! Police officer taser! Show us your taser!
Stay still.
Police officer taser! Police officer taser!
Do not move.
Do not.
Cuffs, please.
Get him up. Sorry, 2 seconds.
We're going to stand him up.
No problem. No problem.
This moment in time, mate, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder.
This is 47-year-old Haybe Cabdiraxmaan Nur. Just after 2:30 p.m. on the 6th of May 2025, this man walked into the Lloyds Bank on St Peter Street in Derby, East Midlands, got out a knife and then, without warning or provocation, plunged it into the chest of a man who just happened to be in the bank at the same time as well. Afterwards, having been in the bank for no more than 22 seconds, the perpetrator turned around and calmly walked out. Meanwhile, the victim, a 37-year-old father of 3 by the name of Govinda Johal, collapsed to the ground with the knife still in his chest. Bank staff immediately called 999, but despite efforts to revive him, Mr. Johal was pronounced dead at the scene at 3:15 p.m. Who was the perpetrator and why did he do what he did? The perpetrator fled Somalia in 2016 after his wife was a victim of an honour killing. Following this, the man was diagnosed with complex PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. After initially travelling to Libya from Somalia in 2016, the killer was sent $1,800, don't know who from, and it's equivalent to around 1,362 quid, to get on a boat to Europe. The man, who arrived in the UK in October 2024 after paying a smuggler €400, or roughly 352 quid, had previously spent time in Italy, France, Germany, Luxembourg and the Netherlands, and the story to his time in those countries is coming up. The perpetrator sold cigarettes illegally while living in camps in France and Italy, and he'd arranged the €400 trip to the UK himself. He had claimed asylum in October last year, shortly after arriving in the UK, but his application was rejected by the Home Office in January 2025 because he had arrived voluntarily. The man later appealed the decision, and the decision was in fact under review at the point when the man committed his act of murder, and the fact that he hadn't automatically been granted asylum appears to be partly why the perpetrator did what he did. Basically, it came from frustration. On this same point, while the man had no previous convictions in the UK, he was arrested in Derby on the 13th of December 2024 following an argument with a man. In that incident, the antagonist ran into traffic, headbutted a man and called English people white racists. The man is also recorded as having smashed a window in a phone shop in Derby in April 2025. Earlier on the said date, before murdering Mr. Johal, the perpetrator had consumed 3 bottles of vodka and 10 beers and had been in contact with the charity Migrant Help. In a number of calls, in fact, that started in the morning and ran into the early afternoon, the man was aggressive, making threats to take his own life and to kill other people. It turns out that the perpetrator felt like he was living like an animal and also felt that he wasn't being supported through his mental health issues. After one of the calls, the charity contacted East Midlands Ambulance Service with their concerns over the man's mental state and with their fears that the man was going to harm himself and others exactly as he had threatened and exactly as he subsequently did. Anyway, EMAS then contacted the police and it was deemed by the police that the ambulance service was the appropriate agency to deal with this man. So the ambulance went over to the man's address just before 3 o'clock, shortly after the man arrived home having killed an innocent man. The perpetrator told the ambulance at this point that even though he was indeed highly frustrated in his day-to-day, he had since sobered up and had no intention of taking his own life or hurting anyone else. The man was later tracked down and arrested a few hours later after police found him asleep on his bedroom floor. When he was taken into custody, the man became abusive and said in Somali, "What can they take from me? What can you change about me? You can't change anything about me. You can kill me as normal. I did this intentionally." At trial, the man's history of offending across Europe was revealed. That's why I said earlier the story to his time in the different countries of Europe that he stayed in was going to come up. In May 2023, the man received a suspended sentence for robbery in Italy and was arrested for the theft of bicycles in Germany a month later. Police in Berlin were called out to a refugee centre where the man had threatened to take his own life. The man then moved to the Netherlands, where it was reported that there were 3 minor incidents of public disorder while drunk. The man also spent time in Luxembourg, committing 8 offences of stealing alcohol. The perpetrator was so drunk that on many occasions when he was arrested, he couldn't be questioned. We are all now thinking the same thing, I reckon. How the hell was the man ever allowed into this country? I do wonder how he was allowed into other countries after he got a suspended sentence in Italy even, but my main priority is our country, the UK. If we couldn't actually stop him getting in, then why didn't we immediately do international police checks on the man the second he got here and then deport him straight out as soon as we found out about his offending that he did all over Europe? At the very least, why didn't we boot the man out straight after his first arrest? Mr. Jahal was a much-loved father of 3 whose children have said, quote, "A monster took daddy away," unquote. Echoing these words, in her victim impact statement, Mr. Jahal's sister said, quote, "The light in our family has been extinguished. The deepest wound is the impact on the children. They had their innocence stolen," unquote. On the 29th of October 2025 at Derby Crown Court, the perpetrator got life with a minimum of 25 years. Unlike this perpetrator though, Shaine March was intimately acquainted with his murder victim and she was carrying his child when he stabbed her to death, exactly as you're about to hear.
Record this.
Everything's cool, recorded in the van, sir.
I don't ever want to come up. Keep me in it. Keep me in Joe. Anyway, I want my grave in a Joe. Yeah? Yeah! That's me. You see my face? Yeah!
These words of 46-year-old Shaine March don't express any remorse of his for stabbing his pregnant girlfriend to death. They're words of defiance and shamelessness. In the early hours of the 22nd of July 2024, over at his girlfriend's flat in Walthamstow, East London, Shaine March picked up a knife and stabbed his very girlfriend, 32-year-old Alana Odysseus, mother to a 2-year-old girl and also expecting for a second time with none other than Shaine, and stabbed her at least 19 times, as well as slashing her at least 5 times. A number of the wounds were defensive injuries, caused as Alana, of course, tried to protect herself. The stab wounds that March inflicted to her legs were consistent with her being on the ground and kicking out. Her blood was found both inside and outside her flat. Just before 3 a.m, neighbours found Alana outside, bleeding and repeatedly naming March as her attacker. despite the efforts of her neighbours and then the emergency services, who arrived, of course, within minutes of the 999 calls that they got. Alana couldn't be saved, the woman being pronounced dead at 3:52 a.m. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife measuring 24 centimetres in length and 2.8 centimetres at its widest point, was later found abandoned nearby in front of a neighbour's door. It was heavily stained with Alana's blood. After Alana died, her daughter, Victoria, was found unharmed inside the flat, the little girl having since become an orphan as her father had died sometime before. There are more shocking and very sad twists to this story to come before we answer why the perpetrator did what he did. And hey, I just won't be able to answer why he doesn't like it when he gets any girlfriend of his knocked up. March had a string of previous convictions for violent offences, the least of which not being the act of murder that he perpetrated in 2000 at the age of 21. 6 months after getting out of prison on licence, which happened in January 2013, he was sent back inside for stamping on his then partner's belly. Her pregnant belly, if you want to know. After getting out again in February 2018, the man didn't commit any known further offences until the moment when he stabbed his girlfriend to death. At this point, the perpetrator had only been in a relationship with Alana for about 4 months, and the two had only recently found out that Alana was pregnant. Alana was vulnerable. She had suffered serious personal losses, including that of her former partner Ruslan, Victoria's father, who had committed suicide. She had long since confided in family and friends about the perpetrator's controlling and abusive behaviour towards her, including his physical assaults and his emotional manipulation of her. Only hours before her death, in fact, she had WhatsApped a sister of hers called Jasmine and told her about feeling unwell, about the perpetrator's acting up, about her pain and about the man's indifference to it, and also about her need to protect Victoria. She told her sister, quote, "Can't help who you love, but he don't love any of us," unquote. Later on, Alana and her boyfriend had a blazing row that eventually spilled out onto the street, the perpetrator taking that opportunity to lock Alana out for a while after subsequently going back inside himself. This was around midnight on the 22nd of July 2024. Sometime after she managed to get back inside, Alana and her boyfriend got into another argument in the kitchen, this time about the man's trainers. That appears to be what triggered the perpetrator's murderous act, the perpetrator having revealed to a prison officer when he was remanded into custody that Alana had said, quote, please stop, you have murdered me," unquote. What I can't tell you is whether or not the impairments to the man's cognitive function, occasioned by the brain injury that he suffered at the age of 17, played any role in the man's act of murder. After murdering his girlfriend, March went out, dumped 3 phones of his, one of which having later been recovered and having been found to hold 2 voice notes in which the perpetrator admitted to murdering his girlfriend.
"I just killed someone and I'm going to go back to jail. Mom, I just killed a woman and I'm going back to jail."
Next, the man went to Cream's Cafe, a place that wasn't far away. The employee working that shift called the police after March told him what he'd done. By 5 a.m, March was in the back of a police van on his way to the police station.
I don't regret nothing. Yeah? Give me the death chamber. Yeah? That's what I want. A lethal injection and put me out of my misery. Yeah? And let me just drop this job. Either way, it doesn't bother me. I'm devil's picnic. Yeah? There's a place for me now in hell. Thank you. Thank you to the kind officers. Thank you. We call this yeah?
Everything's cool, recorded in the van, sir.
I don't ever want to come up. Keep me in there. Keep me in jail. Anyway, I want my grave in a jail. Yeah? Yeah! That's me. You see my face? Yeah!
When, on the 31st of October 2025 at the Old Bailey, March was sentenced, he'd been in prison for 15 months. However, Unlike the usual case where a person gets the time that they have spent on remand in custody awaiting trial deducted from their sentence, March didn't get any time deducted. The man wasn't in prison on remand between his arrest and his sentencing. He was in prison doing more of his life sentence for his first murder.
You and everyone else in court should understand three things about the minimum term that I am about to impose. First, you must serve every day of it before the parole board can even consider releasing you. Following your arrest for the murder of Elena, you were recalled to prison to continue serving your life sentence for the murder of Andre Drummond. There are therefore no days on remand in custody to be deducted from the minimum term that I must impose.
So, at the Old Bailey on the 31st of October 2025, 47-year-old March got a new life sentence with a minimum term of 42 years. Mohamed Samak also murdered his partner, his wife, and who's to say that his reasons for doing so aren't even more deplorable than March's, a point that you can judge in the next minutes.
At this stage, you're in arrest.
What have I done? Can I just sit my wife and speak to her, please? Please. I swear to God, I swear. I didn't listen. I just need to. Why in this situation? I want to see my wife.
Need to get you stand up, fella.
No, stand up for me now.
Why are we doing this for me? It's not why. I can't read. It's
just
not.
follow us down the stairs, okay?
It's not.
As you've probably realised, the expression of grief and upset from this man, 43-year-old Mohamed Samak, whose wife, Daejaun Samak, aged 49, died not long before this moment, is just an act. Samak is the one who kills Daejaun. Samak's act of murder came on the 1st of July 2024 at the couple's home in Droitwich Spa, West Midlands. The perpetrator stabbed his wife 6 times in the chest and abdomen, causing wounds that ranged from 2.5 centimetres to 10 centimetres deep. In a crazy explanation of how his wife sustained those wounds, the perpetrator told police that the wounds were self-inflicted. His wife had killed herself.
At 10 minutes past 4 this morning, police received a telephone call from you reporting, in your words, that your wife, she has a knife, and that you had found her on the ground with a knife. So I'm going to ask you a number of questions in relation to this. But firstly, did you murder Daejaun Samak?
No.
You lied to the call taker when you made that telephone call. You lied to the police officers at the scene. You lied to me in the first and second interview, didn't you?
I didn't mean to lie.
He also said his wife had alcohol and mental health problems, claims that were strongly refuted by the lady's family and friends, while nobody believed for a second that the victim had stabbed herself in the places mentioned as many as 6 times and with such force as to occasion her death. Samak is a former Egyptian international hockey player and coach who worked with the Wales under-18s team. He and Daejaun had met in 2011 when Daejaun went on a trip to Egypt. Samak was an employee at the hotel where she was staying, and they conducted a long-distance relationship before getting married in 2014 and settling in Worcestershire. Samak, though, failed to find steady employment in the UK, and prosecutors said that the man murdered his wife, a successful interior designer, because he was suffering financial problems and had become interested in another woman. The perpetrator admitted to having cheated on his wife. He believed his wife, who was the main breadwinner, would leave him after the problems that they had been having in their marriage. The man was found guilty of his wife's murder on the 29th of October 2025 after a retrial in which the police presented new evidence against the perpetrator, namely blood-stained clothing. A jury at an earlier trial, you see, had failed to reach a verdict. Judge Burbridge said that after his violent stabbing spree, Samak had chosen not to administer CPR to Daejaun despite having a first aid kit in his room. He said that Samak instead focused on covering up his crime and hid the bloodstained clothing in the loft. You became blinded by your needs and your own self-worth, not supported by your wife, but by your own perception. You have destroyed a family. That's a quotation from the judge. And the judge further reproached the perpetrator, asserting that the man had destroyed the lives of Joanne's family, and further sought to besmirch Joanne's character with the false allegations that I cited earlier. The emotion you disclose is either feigned or emotion based on self-pity. I cannot accept that you are remorseful because you still deny responsibility and you put Joanne's loved ones through the trauma of 2 trials. Again, that's a quotation from the judge. Joanne's mother, Penny Vale, told the court that she would never get over the loss of her daughter, who had everything to live for. Quoting her words, "As her mum, I am utterly heartbroken and not a day goes by where I don't think of Jo and cry." Joanne's brother, meanwhile, Mark Vale, told the court that the horror of his sister's violent death haunts him every day. On the 31st of October 2025 at Worcester Crown Court, Samak got life with a minimum term of 21 years. Lawton Akinsoji, a drill rapper from East London, got a longer sentence for his act of murder, his act having been even more brazen, arguably, than Samak's, as you're now about to see. This is the moment from 2017 when East London drill rapper CB, which stands for Cracky Blacks, his real name is Lawton Akinsoji, and he's a member of the Woodgrange gang, stabs to death Ahmed Deen-Ja, known on the street as Grinner, and who belonged to the Custom House gang. And as you've probably gathered, those 2 gangs were rivals, deadly rivals.
I'm arresting you for the murder of Ahmed Deen-Ja on the 2nd of April 2017 on Freemasons Road. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence.
This is CB finally getting arrested for that murder in October 2024. And the thing is, it was very easy for the police to find him when they finally gathered enough evidence against him, because he was already in prison for a conspiracy charge doing 20 years. That was an offence that he committed in 2018, the year after he committed the murder that I've just described. After that murder, he bragged in the lyrics in his drill raps about no face, no case, because initially he and his accomplice on the night, Sunjata Keita, were actually arrested, but they were released soon after due to a lack of evidence against them.
Yes. Everything's suspicion. Okay, when I arrest you, I'll read the date out to you in a second. No problem. So where can we go? Where's the lounge? So, I'm arresting you for murder regarding the incident that occurred on the 2nd of April in 2017. Alright?
And this is the moment of the arrest of CB's accomplice on the night, Sunjata Keita. As at the time of this recording, October 2025, both CB and Sunjata are 27, and in the month where I'm making this video, October 2025, they were found guilty of murder all these years on from the murder. Accordingly, on the 24th of October 2025 at the Old Bailey, Keita got life with a minimum term of 22 years, while Akinsoji got life with a minimum of 28 years. Our next killer took his victim's life for a much more traditional reason, if you like, jealousy. Let's go to his story now.
Show us your hands!
Show us your hands now!
Out! Out!
Now!
It's on your head!
Get on the ground! Get on the ground!
Lay out with your hands out in front of you. Do not move. Do not move.
Do not move.
Another killer who likes playing hide and seek. This is 45-year-old Michael James from Sheffield, South Yorkshire. At some point on the 16th of March 2024, James assaulted his ex-girlfriend, who we'll call Belinda, who he was still living with. To be precise, the man hit Belinda over the head with a bottle, grabbed her arm and punched her in the face. This prompted Belinda's new boyfriend, Bradley Hollis, to climb through the window of his girlfriend's home on the 16th of March 2024 to pay James back by beating him up. In response, James got a knife from the kitchen and fatally stabbed the 35-year-old in front of Belinda while the children in the house were upstairs. Sentencing James, Judge Graham Reed's KC said that his attitude to Mr. Hollis had been a mixture of jealousy and concern. This is a quotation from the judge. He had been intending to fight with you when he came through the window, but he wasn't fighting with a knife and you were. End of the quotation. After stabbing Hollis, James left, taking with him the only phone in the house, which the judge said he did deliberately, knowing that that would impede calling emergency services. James had attempted to dispose of the knife but was arrested a short time later in an outbuilding in Rivlin Valley.
Someone come in for cuffs. Do not move! Cover on. Do not move your hands! What's your name?
Michael James.
Huh?
Michael James. Subject secure.
Michael James.
Gemma Chapman, the mother of two of Mr. Hollis's three daughters, said, "He had his problems in life, but the girls were never aware of this. I could never fault him as a dad." End of quotation. In a statement read to the court, Belinda, who witnessed the fatal incident, said that she would never be able to move on from the loss of Bradley. I'll quote her now. "He was my soulmate, and I believe that that kind of love only comes round once. We had so many plans for the future which have been taken away." Unquote. Judge Reeds also noted that James's own children would have to deal with the repercussions of their father's actions. Quotation, "The children in the home, asleep at the time, woke to the immediate aftermath of a dead person stabbed in their house by their father." Unquote. One of the children had also seen James assaulting their mother. James was cleared of murder but found guilty of manslaughter and possession of a bladed article. On the 16th of October 2025, the man was jailed for 14 years and given a restraining order preventing him from contacting Belinda. What's worse though? Being killed in an act of domestic violence or being killed in an act of gang violence, the exact sort of murder perpetrated by our next two antagonists, their victim having only been 15. Instead of answering that stupid question, let's go straight to the story that I've just outlined. Shortly after 6:30 p.m. on Sunday the 22nd of September 2024, in broad daylight, the life of 15-year-old Daejaun Campbell was snuffed out when he was stabbed to death on a street in Woolwich, southeast London. The stabber was 17-year-old Imri Dow, who comes from Woolwich and who was encouraged or assisted by Marco Balaz, an 18-year-old from Abbey Wood. Dow stabbed Daejaun with a large machete with which he had quite deliberately armed himself, exactly as he had done hundreds of times before. Dow stabbed Daejaun a total of 8 times. One wound was to his head and other injuries to his arms and hands were caused when he tried to protect his head from further injury. Dow also stabbed his victim's thigh and ankle. The fatal injury was delivered with at least moderate force as Daejaun was running away. The machete cut the femoral vein in his leg and penetrated to such a depth that the knife hit the pelvic bone. On the said date, Dow and Balaz met up, together with a third young man who I'll just call Jacob since he was cleared of all involvement with the murder. Jacob drove his two mates to an address to which he had access in Eglinton Road in Woolwich. From that address could be seen a well-trodden path where the two perpetrators knew they might find local boys like Daejaun Campbell, rival gang members who needed to be G-checked, that is gang talk, for the process of testing someone's gangster credentials. As the two young men saw Daejaun head up the path with their faces covered, they ambushed him. While Daejaun had a knife himself, he dropped it almost immediately and then started running away. He didn't get far, however, Balaz standing back and egging Dow on when, after the two caught up with their victim, Dow started stabbing him. Balaz also filmed the scene, as well as Daejaun while he was on the ground collapsed. On hearing Daejaun's screams, a local resident called Tasha Collins compassionately came and tended to the boy until the emergency services arrived. Daejaun was begging her, "Don't let me die, I'm only 15. Meanwhile, as Daejaun lay bleeding to death and calling for his mother, the two perpetrators ran off, making sure to take the machete with them. When the ambulance arrived, Daejaun was pronounced dead at the scene. He had bled to death from a major femoral vessel injury. The two perpetrators were picked up by the police a short while later. Prior to Daejaun's murder, Dow had convictions for possession of knives dating back, in fact, to when he was 13. As regards Balaz, he too had convictions for possession of knives, plus for drugs offences, and While he was in custody awaiting trial, he boasted to both his cousin and his girlfriend about Daejaun's murder. This was particularly upsetting, as you might imagine, for Daejaun's mother, Jodie Taylor, who had to listen to those phone calls during the trial. Daejaun's mother's grief for her butchered son is palpable and raw.
What I loved most about him was his intelligence. He was so intelligent. He was fun, he was witty. My biggest fear was to get that phone call that he was hurt. But instead, I'm living my worst nightmare, that he's no longer here.
When I make the point that Daejaun had allegedly been groomed into gangs and knives and selling drugs, and that his own mother, who was at her wits' end as to what to do to get him to behave, had actually tried to get him removed from her care, I don't do so with any intention of criticising either Daejaun or his mother.
A motive was never established, but police believe he'd been exploited into selling drugs in the area at the time. A reality his mother had warned of. Prior to his death, she had monitored him closely, flagged concerns at school, and even attempted to give up parental responsibility, hoping it would save her son.
I never thought I'd have to make the call to ask for him to be removed, but as I said, I never kept my son's behaviour a secret. What I was experiencing, I never kept it a secret.
This lady is not just sad though, she's also very angry. She was told that her son didn't meet the threshold for being taken into care the day after he was murdered.
His mother says a response for her calls for action was only made the day after Daejaun was killed.
In all the help that I asked for, I was told that he doesn't meet the threshold. He doesn't meet the threshold for the help that I'm asking for, and they need to go back and we need to exhaust all these areas. And I'm like, I've already exhausted them.
On the 6th of October 2024 at the Old Bailey, for the manslaughter of Daejaun Campbell, Marco Ballas got 11 years. For the murder of Daejaun Campbell, Imri Dow got life with a minimum of 21 years. Unlike these two killers, Stephen Lawton, our next case, knew his victim intimately, and yes, his is another case of a man murdering his girlfriend or wife, but it will still leave you shocked, as you're about to see. Aged 45, Stephen Lawton is ex-army. On the 11th of March 2025, up in Bradford, West Yorkshire, he stabbed his girlfriend, 54-year-old Michelle Egg-Bailey, in the neck in her sleep, killing her. The man claimed in court that he didn't mean to kill Michelle, but had simply lost control due to drink. Lawton suffered from PTSD and depression after doing tours to Northern Ireland, Iraq and Afghanistan. He had claimed that before his attack on Michelle, the one that killed her, Michelle had made insulting remarks towards him after she herself had drunk bottles of Prosecco while he drank cans of lager. More importantly, Michelle had, sometime before her murder, complained that she was a victim of domestic abuse at the hands of her boyfriend, who, at the time of his act of murder, was working for the Canal and Rivers Trust charity. Michelle had made several complaints to the police about the man, but had never pressed charges against him. In the days before her murder, Michelle had also called the police to report Lawton for drink driving. Given all these police reports of Michelle, it was claimed in court by the prosecution that Lawton's act of murder was an act of revenge. Mitigating for Lawton though, Frida Hussein KC said that Michelle had been verbally abusive towards Lawton, mocking him for his bedwetting problem, which had come as a result of both his PTSD and the deaths of members of his family. However, Judge Rose didn't accept this, saying that Michelle's dismay over her partner's bedwetting was due to Lawton's never changing the sheet afterwards. Judge Rose told the court that Michelle was greatly loved by her family and her death has inevitably had a great effect on them. He described the pair's relationship as volatile, perhaps even toxic, adding that if Michelle had pressed charges against Lawton for his abusive behaviour towards her, things would possibly have turned out differently. I'll just step in for the judge there and say that Michelle is completely blameless. The person to blame for her murder is the person who murdered her. When she was murdered, Michelle had been asleep due to a high degree of intoxication for the average social drinker, more than 3 times above the legal limit for driving, the judge said. I don't see why that's relevant though. She wasn't driving, she was sleeping. Sorry, I'm just a bit annoyed with the way the judge is criticising Michelle and acting as if somehow she was to blame for her murder. That said, the judge did then go on to say that as she was asleep, she was defenceless and vulnerable, and that if she'd been awake, she would definitely have fought back. On the 6th of October 2025 at Bradford Crown Court, Lawton got life with a minimum term of 16 years. Abul Kasim didn't murder his victim because he was being taunted by him, and the twist to his story will make you seriously angry. Let's get to it. When Abul Kasim, 25, fatally stabbed Martin Sullivan, 63, in his home in Highbury Road, Lawton, north of London, on the evening of the 8th of January 2025. He'd been out of prison for less than 3 months following his early release. He stabbed Mr. Sullivan 9 times, with one wound being about 17 centimetres or 6 inches deep. Emergency services were called at around 11:05 at night, and Martin was taken to hospital, but he died shortly afterwards. Kasim, a known drug dealer, had been using the house that Martin lived in as a base for his drug dealing activity, with Martin's full consent. However, when he demanded to stay the night on the 8th of January, Martin refused and told him to leave. There was evidence that, during the ensuing confrontation, Martin had become afraid of the antagonist and had armed himself with a knife. Kasim, though, got the knife off Martin and then stabbed him with it. The perpetrator's act of fleeing the property straight after showed, said the prosecution, his complete lack of remorse for what he'd just done. Kasim was later identified via his fingerprints on a doorframe and a bottle of juice that he had been drinking from, and he was arrested. In November 2022, the antagonist had been handed a 4-year, 6-month sentence for drugs and weapons offences, but was released early in October 2024. Mr. Sullivan's daughter, Tiffany, told the judge in a victim impact statement that her father was the best dad that she could ask for. Detective Inspector Caver Taylor of the Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire Major Crime Unit said, quote, Kasim's utterly senseless and violent actions led to Martin losing his life, which has caused a huge amount of pain and suffering to Martin's family and friends, unquote. She described Mr. Sullivan as a much-loved and recognisable figure in the community and could often be seen walking his dogs in the Bury Park area. On the 15th of October 2025 at Lawton Crown Court, Kasim got life with a minimum term of 21 years. The woman that Apapale Adoum murdered wasn't his drug-dealing hostess or his girlfriend or his wife. She was a good Samaritan who had helped Adoum out of a tight spot to her cost. On the 9th of February 2025, 2 days after 37-year-old mother of 4 Victoria Adams invited homeless Apapale Adoum, 39, to come and stay with her in her flat in Hammersmith, West London, Adoum bludgeoned her to death with a mallet. The antagonist caused at least 10 separate injuries to the back and side of Victoria's head, his attack on the woman coming when, having met the perpetrator in a homeless shelter on the 6th of February 2025, she asked him to move back out. Victoria was discovered dead in her home on the 9th of February after police were called to a report of a man attempting to break into the property. The man was, of course, Adoum. The victim was found face down in a bedroom with a black bin bag over her head, which was covered by a pillow. What Victoria probably didn't know when she offered to put the perpetrator up in her home was that the man had a history of violence against women. In 2018, he broke a woman's jaw and gave her a black eye, and then, after getting himself sent to prison, in 2024 he attacked 2 female prison officers, punching one of them in the face, knocking her out. In court for Victoria's murder, Adoum denied, in an aggressive outburst from the dock, that he was a woman beater, saying, quote, "I'm just violent, that's my problem. I'm a bad man for that, don't make me out to be a coward," unquote. When he was arrested for his act of murder, he was carrying 2 knives plus a screwdriver, and we know from the murder committed by Deng Chol Majek in October 2024 that a screwdriver can be a murder weapon all right. On the day that Victoria met the perpetrator, police had been called to her home by neighbours who had heard screams coming from her flat, and Victoria told police that she had been attacked by drug dealers. Putting Adoum up was to give him somewhere to stay because he had nowhere else to go, and to derive protection from him against drug dealers. In court though, it was speculated by the prosecution that, in his short stay with Victoria, the perpetrator had behaved violently, causing Victoria to fear him, prompting her to chuck him out. A drug user himself, Adoum responded to Victoria's act of ordering him out of her home by attacking her with a mallet in a blind rage, the prospect of becoming homeless again being nothing less than horrific to him. Police came to Victoria's flat after a neighbour became concerned at Adoum's repeated attempts to get back into Victoria's flat through a communal door. On being arrested, Adoum asked officers, "Am I going to get the rest of my stuff from upstairs?" showing, as such, no remorse for what he had done, exactly as we've seen from some of the other perpetrators that we've looked at. In a victim impact statement, Victoria's younger sister, Sophie Luff, said, quote, "The day I found out she was gone, I was in complete shock. A few hours later, I learned that she hadn't just died, she'd been murdered in her own home by a man that she barely knew, a man that she was only trying to help. The hardest part is knowing that she left behind 4 beautiful children. It breaks my heart to know that they will grow up without her. She didn't deserve this. No one does." Unquote. Having pleaded guilty to Victoria's murder, on the 30th of October 2025 at the Old Bailey, Adoum got life with a minimum term of 21 years. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.